Every legend hides a truth. Every myth whispers a warning. Welcome to the Mythic Hour, where the forgotten gods and cursed stories return to life. Long ago, when the Nile was still a river of myths and the pyramids were only whispers in stone, there was Osiris, the green-skinned god of life, fertility, and the eternal cycle. He was not born to rule through fear or conquest. Instead, his power rested in something far rarer: harmony. The Egyptians said he brought the rhythm of the seasons, the flooding of the Nile, and the grain that bent golden under the sun. Where he walked, life followed. Where he spoke, people listened. Osiris did not just wear the crown of Egypt, he embodied it. The land thrived under him. Farmers looked to the river with gratitude. Merchants filled the markets with goods from Nubia, Byblos, and beyond. Priests raised hymns to the gods, praising not just the heavens but the justice that flowed from their king. Egypt, under Osiris, was not merely a kingdom, it was a paradise shaped by order, by Ma'at, the sacred balance of truth and justice. But a king is rarely alone. At his side stood Isis, his queen, sister, and partner in both magic and love. Her devotion to him was legendary, and the people adored her as much as they adored their king. Together, Osiris and Isis ruled as a pair of light and wisdom, a harmony that echoed the stars themselves. Yet, where there is light, there is also shadow. And in that shadow stood Set, Osiris's brother. Set was a god of the desert, wild storms, dry winds, barren sands. He was strong, fierce, and cunning, but he was also restless. Where Osiris saw the Nile as a source of life, Set saw it as a chain that bound him to a land he could never rule. He looked upon Osiris's throne with envy, upon Isis's devotion with bitterness, and upon Egypt's love with rage. For as long as Egypt prospered under Osiris, Set was nothing more than the shadow behind the sun. But shadows are patient, and Set's patience was about to end. Set was unlike his brother in every way. Osiris carried himself with calm authority, speaking in tones that reassured his people. Set, by contrast, was fire and storm, loud, forceful, and impossible to ignore. His hair seemed always wind-blown, his eyes sharp as the desert sun, and his laugh could make even warriors uneasy. In the desolate stretches of Egypt's red land, where sandstorms howled and nothing grew, Set found his domain. The Egyptians feared these barren places, but to Set, they were home. He thrived in the wild chaos of the desert, hunting under the scorching sky, his strength unmatched, his cunning as dangerous as the serpents that slithered in the dunes. And yet, despite his power, Set remained in his brother's shadow. The people of Egypt did not pray to him for abundance. They did not bring him offerings of grain or wine. Instead, they whispered his name when storms broke boats apart on the Nile or when caravans vanished in the desert. He was not adored, he was feared. That fear ate away at him. At first, Set tried to dismiss it. Let Osiris have his crown, he told himself. I will rule the desert, the storms, the wild places no man dares go. But envy is a poison, and once it enters the heart, it does not leave easily. Set began to notice the smallest slights. The way priests chanted Osiris's name louder than his. The way children painted Osiris's face on walls, never his. Even Isis's gentle smile, always for Osiris, felt like a blade to his pride. Night after night, Set paced beneath the stars, his thoughts circling like vultures. Why him? He growled. Why should Osiris be king? Am I not as strong? Am I not as divine? The people love him, but love is a fragile thing. Perhaps they need reminding that power, not kindness, truly rules Egypt. It was then that Set's jealousy hardened into resolve. He would not live forever in Osiris's shadow. He would claim the throne, no matter the cost. But to take a crown from one as beloved as Osiris, brute force would never be enough. He would need cunning. He would need patience. He would need a plan so flawless that even the god of life himself would not see it coming. And Set was nothing if not cunning. The seeds of betrayal had been planted. All that remained was the harvest. The people of Egypt spoke often of the harmony between Osiris and Isis, of the prosperity that never seemed to end. They sang hymns in the temples, praising their king who brought them fertile fields and peaceful order. But as the festivals grew brighter, so too did the darkness within Set's heart. He had watched long enough. The time had come to act. Set began to weave his plan in silence. He knew Osiris was trusting, too trusting. The god of life believed the world was as honest as his own heart. He could not imagine betrayal coming from his own brother's hands. And that, Set decided, would be his greatest weapon. He crafted a coffin. No, not a coffin, but a masterpiece. Its wood was cedar from distant lands, polished until it gleamed like amber. Inlaid with gold and precious stones, it shone brighter than the sun. The people would think it a gift worthy of a king, never suspecting the trap hidden in its design. The coffin was built to the exact measure of Osiris's body. At last, the night of the feast came. Set hosted it with all the grandeur of a loyal brother. He invited nobles, priests, musicians, and dancers. Torches lined the palace walls, casting golden light across tables piled high with bread, figs, honey, roasted meats, and goblets of wine. Laughter and music filled the air, masking the storm brewing beneath it all. Osiris arrived as the honored guest, draped in linen, his crown gleaming, Isis at his side. The crowd rose to their feet in reverence. To all who looked upon them, the royal pair seemed eternal, untouchable. But Set's smile never reached his eyes. When the wine had flowed and the music reached its height, Set clapped his hands. Servants carried forth the coffin, its surface shimmering under the torchlight. Gasps rippled through the hall. Never had anyone seen such craftsmanship. "My friends," Set cried, "behold this chest, finer than any treasure in Egypt. Let us make a game of it. Whoever fits inside it most perfectly shall keep it as a gift." The nobles laughed, intrigued. One by one they tried, but each was too tall, too short, too broad, or too slim. The chest seemed made for no one. And then Set turned to his brother. "Surely," he said smoothly, "our great king Osiris should try. For if the chest is worthy of any man, it is him." Osiris, ever gracious, smiled and stepped forward. He lowered himself into the chest, stretching his arms, settling comfortably within it. To everyone's astonishment, it fit him as though made for his very body. "That is yours, brother," someone laughed. "A gift fit for the king." But before Osiris could rise, the game turned to horror. Set roared, and his conspirators, hidden among the guests, sprang into action. They slammed the heavy lid shut. Iron nails were hammered in, molten lead poured over the seams. The joyous hall erupted into screams, but no one could save their king. Inside the chest, Osiris cried out once, his voice muffled, then silence fell. The music stopped. The torches flickered. Set stood tall, his laughter ringing through the chaos. "Behold," he declared, "the king of Egypt is no more." And with that he ordered the chest thrown into the Nile. The river swallowed it, carrying Osiris away into the darkness. The banquet that began in celebration ended in terror. For the first time, Egypt trembled, not at the power of the desert, but at the cruelty of a god who had killed his own brother. The palace that had once echoed with music now rang with silence. Egypt, once so full of life under Osiris's hand, felt a sudden chill, as if the Nile itself mourned. The crops bent low, the people whispered in fear, and everywhere, shadows seemed longer. But no one grieved more than Isis. When the news reached her, the unthinkable truth that her husband, her brother, her king, had been sealed away and cast into the Nile, she did not wail like mortal women. Instead, her sorrow was a quiet, unbreakable thing. Her tears flowed like the river, yes, but beneath them burned a fire of resolve. For Isis was no ordinary queen. She was a goddess of magic, wisdom, and devotion. Her love for Osiris was legendary, but her strength was even greater. She would not let death have the final word. Clad in mourning robes, Isis set forth on a journey that would take her across the world. She combed the banks of the Nile, asking the reeds and the fish if they had seen her beloved. She wandered through villages in disguise, listening to rumors, piecing together fragments of truth. She crossed marshes and deserts, never resting, guided only by faith and whispers from the wind. At last, the Nile gave up its secret. The chest that held Osiris had floated far north, carried by the currents until it lodged against the roots of a great tamarisk tree. Over time, the tree had grown around it, enveloping the coffin in its trunk, as though trying to keep the god within safe from harm. But fate had other plans. In the city of Byblos, a king had admired the mighty tamarisk and ordered it cut down. Its trunk, with the chest still hidden inside, was brought to his palace to serve as a pillar in his great hall. There, Osiris rested, silent and unseen, far from the land he had once ruled. When Isis discovered this, she disguised herself once more, entering the palace as a humble nursemaid. Her grace and wisdom soon won her favor with the queen of Byblos, who welcomed her into the household. But Isis's heart was always with the pillar, where she could feel Osiris's presence calling to her like a heartbeat. One night, she revealed her true nature. Casting aside her disguise, she shone in divine glory, her magic filling the palace like the rising moon. The king and queen of Byblos bowed before her, awed by the goddess in their midst. With reverence, they gave her the pillar. Isis split the wood, revealing the coffin hidden within. Her hands trembled as she touched it, her tears falling upon the golden surface. She had found him. Yet even in that moment of triumph, Isis knew her work was not done. Osiris was still dead, and Set's treachery still lingered over Egypt. She would need all her magic, all her strength, to bring him back. And she would not be alone. For soon, her sister Nephthys, the wife of Set but loyal to Isis, would join her in mourning and in hope. Together, they would weave a spell that had never before been attempted, to gather life out of death. Isis closed her eyes and whispered to the coffin, "I will not let the darkness keep you. I will find a way, beloved, even if I must chase your soul through the stars." The queen of magic had spoken, and fate itself began to stir. Isis returned to Egypt with the coffin, her heart heavy yet unyielding. She hid herself in the marshes of the delta, where the reeds grew tall and the waters whispered secrets. There, in the stillness, she opened the chest and gazed upon Osiris. Even in death, he looked like a king. His body, though lifeless, carried the dignity of eternity. Isis's tears fell upon him, but she did not surrender to despair. For Isis was not only the goddess of love, she was the mistress of magic. Calling upon her sister Nephthys, she began the work no god had dared before. Night after night, the two sisters circled the coffin, chanting spells older than the pyramids, weaving enchantments with voices that shook the stars. They called upon the breath of the sky god Shu, the waters of Nun, and the wisdom of Thoth, scribe of the gods. Their lament became legend, the lamentations of Isis and Nephthys, a song so powerful that even the dead stirred at its sound. And Osiris heard. His chest rose faintly, his lips quivered with breath not his own. Death had not been undone, but it had been pierced. Isis had drawn him back for a moment, long enough to hold him, to speak to him, to join with him. It was in that brief union that a miracle occurred. From their love, even in the shadow of death, a child was conceived, Horus, destined to become the avenger of his father and the heir to Egypt's throne. But Set was not blind. Word reached him that Osiris's body had been found, and that Isis was working her forbidden magic. Rage consumed him. He stormed across the land, hunting for the coffin, his fury greater than the desert storms. At last he found it. In a frenzy of violence, Set ripped open the chest, dragging Osiris's body into the night. If one death had not been enough, he would ensure no resurrection could ever come. With brutal force, Set hacked the body of his brother into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. To him, it was victory. No god, no magic, could reassemble what had been so thoroughly destroyed. But Isis was not so easily defeated. With Nephthys at her side, she began the second quest, a journey across the land to gather the scattered fragments of Osiris. From the marshes of the delta to the deserts of the south, from villages to temples, she searched tirelessly. Wherever she found a piece, she wept and gave it burial rites, building shrines that would later become sacred sites across Egypt. Piece by piece, the god was restored, save one. The final fragment, Osiris's phallus, had been devoured by a fish in the Nile, lost forever. Yet Isis, with her magic, shaped a replacement and continued the rites. Through her devotion, Osiris was made whole. Not living as he once was, but transformed into something greater, the first to pass fully into the afterlife and rise again, not as king of the living, but as lord of the dead. Though his days on earth had ended, Osiris would rule a kingdom still, one beyond time, where all souls journeyed after death. And from that throne, he would watch as his son Horus grew, destined to face Set and restore balance to Egypt. Isis's struggle had not returned her husband to her side, but it had reshaped eternity. The cycle of death and rebirth was sealed, and Osiris became the eternal judge, waiting at the gates of the afterlife. But the story was far from over. For Horus, the child born of grief and love, was growing, and Set's storm was not yet spent. Deep in the marshes of the Nile Delta, Isis hid herself away. The world above was still dangerous, Set's fury had not abated, and if he discovered that Osiris's line continued through a child, he would stop at nothing to destroy it. In that secret refuge of reeds and waterways, Isis gave birth to a son. His cry pierced the night, sharp and clear, like the falcon's call at dawn. She named him Horus. From the moment he entered the world, it was clear Horus was no ordinary child. His eyes shone with the light of his father, and his tiny fists clenched as though ready to seize the throne Set had stolen. But though he was destined for greatness, he was still only a child, and Isis knew the weight of Set's wrath could easily crush him. So she raised him in secrecy. The goddess became both mother and protector, weaving spells around the marshes to conceal her son. Every rustle of reeds could be a spy, every shadow a danger, and yet Isis endured. She hunted for food, taught Horus the songs of the Nile, and whispered to him stories of his father. "Your father was a king," she told him as he drifted to sleep. "He brought peace to the land and life to the soil. He was betrayed, but you, my son, will restore what was lost. You are the falcon of the sky, the avenger, the heir." But raising the child of prophecy was not without peril. Venomous snakes crept through the reeds, scorpions scuttled beneath the sand, and storms lashed the marshes. Some say Set himself sent these dangers, desperate to snuff out the boy before he could grow. Others believed chaos itself recoiled against the child of destiny. Yet Isis was tireless. She invoked her magic against every threat. When snakes struck, she chanted spells that drew out poison. When sickness tried to claim him, she whispered charms that healed. The gods themselves seemed to protect Horus, Thoth with wisdom, Hathor with comfort, Neith with strength. And so, under Isis's watchful eye, the boy grew. As he reached manhood, his strength became evident. He was swift as the falcon, sharp-eyed and unyielding. In his gaze burned both the patience of his mother and the justice of his father. Horus did not only inherit Osiris's legacy, he carried within him the will of every Egyptian who longed for balance restored. Whispers began to spread among the people. In the fields, in the temples, in the marketplaces, they spoke of the hidden son of Osiris. Hope stirred in their hearts. Perhaps the Nile would flood again as it once did, perhaps the land would return to harmony, perhaps justice would once more sit upon the throne. But Set also heard these whispers. And if there was one thing he despised more than Osiris, it was the thought of Osiris's heir rising against him. The storm god prepared for war. When Horus came of age, he no longer hid in the marshes. He stepped into the world, tall and proud, the falcon crown upon his head. The people saw him and whispered, "Osiris lives again through his son." Hope returned like the first flood of the Nile after a long drought. But Set was not a god who yielded. He had ruled Egypt through fear and brute force, and he would not surrender to a boy, no matter whose son he was. The conflict between Horus and Set began as a quarrel for the throne, but it quickly grew into a struggle that shook heaven and earth. The other gods gathered in the great tribunal, presided over by Ra, the sun god, to settle the matter. "Who shall rule Egypt?" they asked. Set, who seized the throne, or Horus, rightful heir of Osiris? Set stood tall, his desert-red skin glowing under the sunlight. "I am strength," he roared. "I am the storm that scatters enemies, the desert that swallows the unworthy. A weakling cannot hold the throne. Egypt needs me." Horus spoke with calm but fiery conviction. I am my father's son. The blood of Osiris flows in me. I bring justice, not tyranny. I will heal the land you have scarred with your chaos. The tribunal hesitated. Both had power. Both were gods. And so, judgment would not come through words alone. It would come through trials. The gods decreed contests between the rivals, each designed to prove who was worthy of the crown. First came the race across the Nile. The gods commanded that each build a boat of stone. Set, ever cunning, carved his vessel swiftly, confident it would outmatch Horus. But Horus, guided by wisdom, built his boat of wood painted to resemble stone. When the race began, Set's heavy boat sank into the river, while Horus's glided across the water like a falcon in flight. Laughter echoed among the gods, but Set's rage only grew. Next came battles of strength and cunning. Horus and Set wrestled in the form of mighty animals, falcon against hippopotamus, hawk against bull. Their clashes shook the heavens, their roars echoed across deserts and valleys. In one terrible fight, Set gouged out Horus's left eye, leaving it broken and bleeding. But the gods intervened. Thoth, the scribe of wisdom, healed the eye, restoring it not just to its former state but transforming it into a symbol of wholeness and protection. The eye of Horus, a sign of divine power that would endure for millennia. Still, the tribunal wavered. Years passed, trial after trial, conflict after conflict. Neither god yielded, and the balance of the world trembled with their struggle. At last, weary of the endless battle, Isis herself intervened. She confronted Set, not with swords or storms, but with cunning. Taking the form of a beautiful young woman, she approached him while he rested. She spoke of a cruel man who had stolen his brother's lands and asked if such injustice should be allowed. Never! Set thundered. The thief should be punished and the rightful heir restored. In that moment, Isis revealed her true form. Then you have judged yourself, Set. For you are that thief, and my son is the rightful heir. The gods, unable to ignore his own words, turned their gaze toward Horus. Ra hesitated, torn by Set's strength and Horus's claim. But at last, balance could not be denied. The tribunal declared Horus the ruler of Egypt. Justice had triumphed. Defeated, Set was cast into the desert, his storms left to rage where no crops grew, where no Nile flowed. Horus ascended the throne, his father's crown upon his head, the people rejoicing. Order had been restored, but Osiris did not return to earth. His place was no longer among the living. From the underworld he watched, seated upon a throne of eternal shadow and light. He had become the judge of souls, the ruler of the afterlife, where every mortal would one day stand before him. The age of Osiris on earth had ended. The age of Horus had begun. Though Horus ruled the throne of Egypt and Set wandered the desert in defeat, the tale of Osiris did not end with his death. In truth, his story had only just begun. For Osiris had passed into a realm beyond the reach of storms or thrones. Beneath the earth, in the shadowed halls of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, he claimed a new crown. There, seated upon a throne of black stone inlaid with gold, he became the eternal judge of souls. Every mortal who died, king or farmer, rich or poor, would make the same journey. Guided by Anubis, jackal-headed lord of mummification, they would stand before the scales of justice. On one side of the balance, their heart was placed, on the other, the feather of Mot, truth, balance, order. If the heart weighed heavy with sin, it would be devoured by Ammit, the fearsome beast with the jaws of a crocodile, the mane of a lion, and the haunches of a hippopotamus. That soul would vanish forever. But if the heart was pure, if it balanced with the feather, then Osiris himself would welcome the soul into the field of reeds, a paradise where the Nile flowed eternally, crops never failed, and families were reunited. This judgment was not merely ritual, it was Osiris's gift to humanity. Though betrayed and slain, though dismembered and scattered, he had shown that death was not the end. There was life beyond life, a place where justice reigned and the good were rewarded. The people of Egypt never forgot. In temples across the land, priests raised hymns to Osiris, their voices echoing into eternity. Hail Osiris, Lord of the everlasting, King of eternity, ruler of the afterlife. Farmers sowed their fields with prayers to him, believing that as the grain died and rose again, so too did Osiris, and so too would they. Festivals were held each year to remember his death and resurrection, reenacting Isis's mourning, Set's betrayal, and Horus's victory. The myth became more than a story, it became the heartbeat of Egypt's faith. Set, for all his rage, became necessary as well. The Egyptians understood that chaos could never be destroyed completely. Storms, deserts, and darkness would always exist. But Horus's victory proved that order could prevail, and Osiris's rule in the afterlife showed that justice was eternal. Even the greatest pharaohs of Egypt, those who built pyramids and commanded armies, looked to Osiris as their model. They called themselves sons of Osiris, and saw their deaths as a passage into his realm, where they would reign forever alongside him. In the end, Osiris was not remembered for his crown on earth, but for the hope he gave beyond the grave. His betrayal had birthed a new truth, that even death, the greatest of all enemies, could be transformed into a gateway to eternity. So the story lived on, whispered by priests, carved into temple walls, painted on tombs for thousands of years. And whenever the Nile flooded, when life returned to the land, the people of Egypt would smile and say, "Osiris lives again." If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe for more myths that were never meant to be forgotten.